Alright. Let's get things going here. Hello there. I'm Enviroboy. This is my channel. And it's lore day. So we're going to sit here. Actually, hold on a second though. There we go. Things just a little bit brighter here. Make myself just a little bit easier to see. I don't want to deprive you of all of this glory and splendor. God, can you imagine? Anyway, welcome. If you're here early on, welcome. If you're watching the VODs after the fact, welcome. Welcome to anyone, anywhere to my stream. We're gonna work on some lore stuff today. It's Tuesday, which is lore day, and I've actually come to really look forward to lore days, because it's just inventing lore is kind of one of the first things I ever really got into when it comes to world building. I mean, like in D&D in general, because I was, you know, I've talked about it a lot, how I got into world building long before I got into Dungeons and Dragons, and it was just sort of this fascination with the idea of trying to create a world strictly on page, that could just through description and through detail come to life when you read it. you know, kind of inspired very heavily, not just kind of inspired, very, very heavily inspired by, you know, the old school Myst games. And so it was kind of with that mentality that I got very into world building, because I just sort of was fascinated with the concept of creating a lore, a history of a world that could be like the idea that there is a complete and understandable history that someone in the present time might only get small details of and have to kind of piece together the picture. Very, very archaeology, very anthropology based mindset, but with like fictional settings. And that just always fascinated me. And so that's kind of, for me, that's where I feel like a lot of my world building and D&D writing roots sort of come from. So these days are really fun for me. I really like working on lore. I really like sort of demonstrating the process of how someone could come up with lore for their own world, and invent things. And I think one thing that's interesting is within the D&D world, there's the tendency to, and maybe this is just me projecting some frustrations I've experienced in the past with, you know, certain issues. So maybe I'm a little off base in making a broad statement like this, but it always feels to me like there's a certain reverence that's held for lore that already exists within the D&D world, which is fine. Like, there's nothing wrong with that, especially if you're intending all of your games and activities and all that stuff to take place within, you know, the existing lore of D&D. But when it comes to homebrewing stuff, I always take a mindset of there's no real limit to what we can come up with and what we can invent. There's nothing stopping us from doing whatever we feel like doing for any of that. And for me, it's great fun to explore and get creative with all of that stuff. One of the more recent examples of doing this that I really enjoy is the most recent God of War game that came out, and really the God of War lore in general, where they take inspiration from existing, you know, Norse and Greek and all of those mythologies. They take a lot of inspiration and hold true to a lot of themes within that, but then they kind of invent their own characters and invent their own interpretations of characters and their own histories of it. And it sort of creates this interesting amalgamation of familiar yet different. And for me, that's really fun, and that's what is so enjoyable about the process of creating and inventing lore for your own world. And like I say, that was kind of some of the earliest stuff I really got into with world building. So this is, for me, a very fun process. I have a whole lot of fun doing it. It's very enjoyable. And hopefully some of my enthusiasm can rub off on anyone watching. It's always the goal, anyway. So, with that sort of explanation taken care of, I'm going to go ahead and bring us to our live scene, and let's go ahead and get going on stuff here. Alright, here we go. So here we are. I pulled up what we were working on last time, which last time we really worked on, we pretty much spent the whole time working on Lulth, who is sort of, again, it's an existing deity within D&D lore, and so we kind of use that as a springboard, but then we've worked on kind of inventing a history that fits within my world. Now, my world is one in which any deity, any god that exists was not just sort of, like, I don't have my world sort of ascribed to the concept of gods that always have been and always will be gods. Within my lore and my world, gods are creatures or beings that started off as mortal, and then over time, in some way, shape, or form, became more powerful within the ether at large, and sort of rose to becoming deities of sorts. And for me, that just makes their origins much more compelling. It makes it much more interesting to think about where these gods and these deities came from, and why the origins of their religions and their existing religions are the way they are. I think it's a much more interesting thing than to just assume, oh, they've always been there and people have always worshipped them. Like the concept of the world having, or at the very least the modern interpretation of the world having some sort of beginning or some sort of origin, to me is just a very compelling thing. And I always imagine that it's very easy for humans to be, for us people to be compelled by the concept of an origin, because we inherently are bound by our own personal origins and our own end, right? Like we are born and one day we will die. So humans are naturally forced to think of things as beginning and end. And so I think the concept of something having a beginning feels much more compelling in a lot of ways, because that's actually something we can relate to, right? Like the concept of something being eternal and not bound by a beginning or an end is just a very alien concept, and maybe this is just me, but it's something that's hard to cling to, it's something that's hard to relate to. So with that in mind, we kind of worked on Lolth, created a beginning for her and a progression for her, until she's sort of this modern version of a deity who is worshipped pretty much only by the Drow. She sort of established her power, but abandoned a lot of concepts of building a following in the process of doing that. And so there isn't much following of her except for the Drow, who are fascinated with the darkness and the sort of arachnid nature of her. And there's always a few details that we could add, but honestly, when I was rereading this in preparation for today, I'm pretty content with where it is. So if you want to catch up on that, you can check the VOD on my YouTube channel. I've uploaded the VOD. You can find the lore series within the world writing playlist that I have there, and you can find this particular one. And yeah, with that in mind, with that sort of in mind, and the fact that I'm pretty content with how this all kind of shook out, instead of sitting here and working on this anymore, I want to work on something else. I have a different idea in mind, and I want to go in and I want to work with the Drow. So we're going to copy our template here, and we're going to add the Drow in here. Now, a lot of times within the rules is written, I don't want this here, actually. I want to delete that page, and then we're just going to paste what we copied there. Within the lore and the rules as written, Drow are kind of considered a subrace of the elves, and in a lot of ways, within my world, that remains true. But their origin is a little unique and a little different within my world, and so I want to take some time to explore that, and that's going to be today's goal. So we're just going to say Drow here. We can kind of close that out just to give ourselves some more space. That's what we're going to work on now. I talked about last stream how I have in mind the intent to make sure and establish to-do lists for my writing streams to make sure I stay productive and stay focused, because I have the tendency to ramble and get distracted as I'm working on this, and I want to try and be a bit more productive for the sake of the people who are taking the time to watch me here and are interested in figuring out and understanding what my process is, so they can take any parts of it that are helpful. And so I want to make sure I'm staying focused for that. So today, what I really want us to do is I'm just going to put today's goal is to really finish off the Drow here, but we're gonna put all of these different bits in here as our checklist, so we can just sort of monitor our progress and make sure we're making good progress as we go. So we're going to put origins, pre-unhinging history, and then we'll do post unhinging history, and then we have our these things here, class affinities, personality traits, interracial relationships. Particularly class affinities, not going to be quite as important since I'm not trying to create like a homebrew race or anything like that, but I always like to put notes in there anyway, because that sort of helps inform how I would design NPCs, whether they're enemies or allies. designing NPCs to fit certain archetypes really helps kind of keep things thematic when I'm using what I've created within my games here. So we're going to do class, affinities, personality traits, and then interracial racial, there it is, relations. And it's hopefully it doesn't go over poorly using terms like interracial relations. I mean, obviously this is not relating to like real world race and everything. This is using D&D, and so hopefully that goes clear. That's clear in translation, but I don't know another way to clearly describe what I'm working on, because that's what we're doing. It's like a fictional race, but it's a race, but it's like it's different. So hopefully that's clear. I don't know. I'm ready to take flack if people want to pick that fight, but you know. I think most people who would be here watching this would recognize that in this situation, race is referring to, you know, like dark elves. So, anyway, so let's talk about these guys a little bit here. So the origins for these guys are very similar to what we've talked a lot about with the Duergar, with the section of our campaign that we're working on right now. We're working on our players that have our players exploring an abandoned dwarven city that is now overrun with Duergar. And throughout that, I haven't taken the time to write the lore for it, and so maybe if we have time, once we're done with the Drow here, we can sort of explore that in our next lore streams here. But the origin of the Drow is similar to that of the Duergar, in that they are corrupted elves that became so only during the times of the unhinging. Within my world and my lore, the Drow were not really a thing until the unhinging happened a couple thousand years ago. The nature of the unhinging being that all kinds of rifts and tears in reality were torn asunder, leading to a lot of intermingling between material plane, ethereal planes, elemental planes, all of those places, the inner and outer planes, all that stuff. Just the ether at large kind of flooded into the mortal plane. And the result of this was a lot of sort of magical radiation that came in and influenced a lot of the material world, which brought it from being a much more, I always kind of imagine it, just to kind of offer a little bit of mental image for anyone who struggles to understand exactly how I imagine pre and post unhinging worlds of my world. Pre unhinging would have been a very Tolkien-esque world where magic is kind of at a minimal. Magic is at like a minimal, like it's still present, but largely everything is very grounded in just sort of like a real nature, and things that are of a magical nature were very intentionally brought in by wizards and all that kind of stuff. It's a very contained type of world pre-unhinging. But then once the unhinging happens within this world of mine, we see a lot of like wild magic start to show up. Like I say, these tears in reality sort of offered the opportunity for a lot of magical radiation to show up, of sorts, which caused a lot of chaos and a lot of turmoil, caused sort of the natural magical mutation of a lot of creatures and a lot of beings. And it's through that process that within my world we see the Drow originating, same as the Duergar, where the unhinging happens, and within the Siski forest especially, where there are all kinds of different elven societies established, many people were sort of subject to the dangers of this event. Most would have attempted to and succeeded in escaping the forest, getting out, going to any of the nearby cities that were safer and more conveniently away from the magic and fortifiable. But those who were unable to escape or chose not to would have been subject to a lot of this sort of magical radiation. and it's through that the corrupting magics from all the different planes in the ethers that just did not mix well in this area led to sort of the development of the Drow race. It started as sort of a corrupting nature where just existing elves were slowly driven mad and sort of insane, leading to sort of the first generation of Drow, and then them continuing to exist as a society is what sort of eventually continued this into a growing and viable, now viable population or race that exists within the Siski forest here. So that's kind of what their origins are, how I've always imagined it, but I've never taken the time to actually like sit here and write it out. So that's what we're going to work on, is trying to kind of create a short, like a short Encyclopedia Britannica entry of the Drow and their origins and how and who they are now. And as I always say, the importance of this kind of comes into play when we're doing a lot of our roleplay elements within this homebrew world. Being able to keep things as consistent as possible is such a valuable thing when you're trying to create an immersive experience for your players. And so that's why I really value taking the time to do these things. So let's just go ahead and talk about the origins here. We can pretty much just find a way to sort of semi-poetically write everything I've just been discussing here. So this is actually a pretty easy section to do, especially for the Drow, because I already have a pretty clear vision in mind of where these guys came from. So we'll just put something along the lines of the Drow. The Drow were not a race that existed prior to the unhinging. They were formed, or, well, I don't want to say they were formed. That sounds like it was much more intentional than it was. They came into being as a result of magical fallout impacting the elven people who were unfortunate enough to be stuck in the Siski forest during the unhinging. Should be capitalized I should be capitalizing unhinging. Unhinging. There it is. Should be capitalizing that because it's like a kind of considered a proper noun. Like it's a definitive event that happened, and so it's convention within this within my world for it to be capitalized there. But that's, I guess it's neither here nor there. Same with forest. It's a proper noun. It's a title. Okay. Unhinging. Over the past. We're going to do a past approximately 2,000 years since the beginning of the unhinging. And actually what I want to do is I want to start getting more comfortable, and this is just something for me. I want to get more comfortable using the verbiage that would exist within my world. So they would call something like this, so they would say beginning of the unhinged era, right? Because like it's an entire era, it's an entire state of being, or an entire timeline, I should say. It's not a state of being. That's really not at all what I'm trying to say here. So, and I just, like, for my own sake, I want to get more practiced at actually using all that stuff. So we'll say beginning of the unhinged era. Over the past approximately 2,000 years since the beginning of the unhinged era, the Drow have rapidly come into prominence within the Siski forest, aided by the extreme isolation and therefore freedom to grow let's see here. Let me make sure I'm not losing this sentence. Coming to prominence. This is turning into a run-on sentence. I gotta be careful. if I'm trying to approach this from a poetic description perspective, I gotta be careful and not get too wild and crazy with the flowery language here. Let's see. Over the past approximately 2,000 years since the beginning of the Unhinged Era, the Drow have rapidly come into prominence within the Siski forest, aided by the extreme isolation and therefore freedom to grow without any checks on their population. I mean, I guess that kind of, well, that still kind of leaves unclear. Like I really want to make it clear that the lack of competition comes from there not being any other intelligent races present there, like that the lack of competition comes from other races, not from like the wilds itself, because the wilds itself is very dangerous. So instead, here's what I'm gonna do. I want to avoid a run-on sentence here, and we're gonna say, hey, GR Monarchy, good to see you. I appreciate it. My broken colorblind eyes appreciate it. All right. Let's see here. The Drow have rapidly come into prominence within the Siski forest, without competition from other races looking to grow their own societies. The Drow have enjoyed unhindered growth throughout this time. Boom, there we go. There we go. yeah, I've got a few different overlays and stuff going these days. It just looks real pretty. I like to change it up based on what I'm streaming. Like, I've got different ones for different games and stuff too, because I'm obsessed and I think they're pretty and I love them. Oh man. In your defense, I've only been using these overlays for like a week. This is like a very new development in my attempts to look at least a little professional and official in how I do things. So, but yeah, no, I'm glad you like it. I'm glad you like it. All right, let's see here. Let's see here. So the Drow have enjoyed unhindered growth throughout this time. Let's see here. I don't think you did invite me, Monarchy, but I'll tell you right now, I do not have time for anything else added into my schedule right now. I appreciate it, but I do not have time for added stuff. Every night of the week, weekdays and weekends, is presently filled with a repeating weekly event, and every other time in between. So it is appreciated, but unfortunately something that I am unable to partake in at this point. Maybe that'll change in the future, but as of right now, it's we're in busy times, which I enjoy. I'm glad for it, but you know, it's all good stuff that I'm very busy with, but busy nonetheless. Let's see here. Okay, so without competition from other races looking to grow their own societies, Drow have enjoyed unhindered growth throughout this time. Honestly, don't even know if we need a whole lot else for our origins talking about the Drow. Like, that really is it. Most other details are going to start going into the actual detailed history descriptions and readouts. So I kind of think we're good there. Because we can always go back and add more. If we need to. So I'm going to go ahead and check that off our to-do list there. And let's go ahead and move. Okay, so now here's like the easiest one. This is the easiest one. We can go ahead and check off pre-unhinging history, because as we've just described, they do not, the Drow did not exist pre-unhinging. They are directly the result of the unhinging within my world. So we'll say no pre-unhinging history exists for the Drows, for the Drow, as they are the direct result of the unhinging. Any history prior defaults to standard elf history. Boom, there we go. There we go. I have no idea, Monarchy, but if I do find anyone, I'll let you know. I'll let you know if anything comes up. They still have sunlight sensitivity in this history. Yes, but it's not as defining of a characteristic. Hey, True Blue, how's it going? I wouldn't consider it a defining characteristic of them within my world, but it is still a true thing. It's more of a psychological thing, because the Siski Forest is it's a very Mirkwood type of place where it's like there's an almost magical darkness that exists within the forest at large. And so they have an aversion to it, but it would be less of a like physical, ow, it burns, I can't be here, and more of a I hate sunlight, and then they just go hide in the shadows. So it's like that you wouldn't find them in the sun in the sunlight, but it's more so out of choice and discomfort than actual physical inability. The way I would have it within my world, and a lot of that is to facilitate and make it more logical for character players to exist. Because let's be real, how many players remember all the time during every session to hold to strict sunlight sensitivity for a Drow character that they make, right? Like that's the type of rule that like some campaigns, like undoubtedly there are campaigns out there that really would hold true to this and players that would hold true to this, but the average player is going to more so be like, oh yeah, he wears a hood, and then not think about it anymore. And to me, if we're talking about someone who has like a physical inability to really be in the sunlight, then we're talking someone who like that kind of becomes a key element of how they yeah, exactly. It's a fun thing. It can be fun if you're into it, but it can also be super annoying to remember it. So realistically speaking, most players will remember it for the first couple sessions because it's fun and unique, and then after that it's just a hindrance. Same with any character that does not have dark vision. Like they'll remember it the first time they go into a cave, but then after that they're like, boy, it's annoying to have to remember to actively say that we light a torch, you know, or use a magical spell or something like that. So it just kind of falls by the wayside in most games, not all games. And I'm not saying whether that's right or wrong, but generally speaking, that's how it plays out. And so for me, it just kind of makes sense to just say like, yes, they would have it there and they would choose to not be in sunlight, but it's more a comfort thing than it is an actual physiological thing. Is sort of my thoughts on that, and we can kind of delve into that a little bit more about when we go into like personality traits. There's where that'll really fit as we're kind of inventing our history. But yeah, so we've got no pre-unhinging history. Now the post-unhinging history is where things are going to get a little interesting with the Drow here, because there's a lot to kind of unpack with when we're talking about a race that came into being only within 2,000 years and then had their entire society developed within that 2,000 years. I mean, like, that seems like a long time to us peoples because that's like 20 lifetimes. But when we're talking about the grand scheme of culture, that's no time at all. So there's a lot of rapid developments to turn them from being like basically elves into something entirely different. So this is always one of my favorite things to start exploring when we're talking about a race that came into being because of the unhinging. Yeah, chaotic technological history. Yeah, well, and like the thing is we can kind of explain a lot of it away and have it be managed by the fact that it's not like they lose their memories of their elven history, right? They've just kind of been driven mad. So they still understand elven technology and all that kind of stuff, but it does result in a lot of interesting cultural developments when we try to think at least offer some form of logic, even if it's not necessarily realistic. We want to offer up some sort of logic that would exist for this. we'll just open it up by saying the early days of the unhinged era, the Drow were mostly isolated individuals in various states of denying or accepting their growing madness. As the we'll say as the magical radiation of radiation of the forest continued to grow and creep throughout the land, the influences became harder to we'll say avoid, I guess. We're gonna say withstand, harder to withstand, because withstand doesn't imply. Withstand is kind of neutral when it comes to whether or not there was like intention behind them being there or them being trapped, right? Because some of them would have chosen to stay there from, you know, the head in the sand, like, I don't think this is actually that bad. I think I can handle this. Like, things are weird, but we can survive this just fine. And those who, for whatever reason, couldn't move, like if someone was invalid and didn't have anyone to help them leave or anything like that. And so withstand, whether it's like you're intentionally trying to face it head on or you're trapped by it, withstand is a pretty neutral word. So we'll use that one. The influences became harder to withstand by those still among the trees. We'll say the powers of this magic. What am I trying to say here? I'm kind of starting a sentence before I understand where I'm going with it here. This magical radiation of the forest continued to grow and creep through the land. The influences became harder to withstand by those among the trees. Though some were there by choice, and some by a lacking ability to leave. All were slowly driven mad by the influences of the countless planes whose influences were, that's what we want, were spilling into this material plane. So I'm trying to paint a picture of how this all sort of started and how they all sort of went mad. Over time, the madness became more complete and took on a more manageable, there it is, state. Those who were particularly violent in their insanity were swiftly banished or we'll say eliminated, and let that eliminated, and we'll let that imply everything involved there. But let's see here. Those who are particularly violent in their insanity were swiftly banished or eliminated, leaving only those who were more focused in this altered state of mind. So it's like it kind of enters there. Oh, nice. Glad you like the music. I have it set to just sort of like a chill playlist. I always feel like that's a good background music for writing. Although I will confess, I'm not actually listening to the music myself, because if I set the same playlist for myself every single day and have it going like through my monitors into my ears every time I write, a lot of it starts getting repetitive. So I've taken to putting in my other headphones and listening to other things just to keep it varied for myself. But I'm glad you enjoy it. I definitely like whenever I look back at my replays, I definitely feel like I definitely feel like it's a better vibe to have some sort of background music as opposed to just me talking amidst the silence. I mean, my voice is beautiful and all, like, but let's be real here. It's better when tempered with a little bit of background music. All right. Time the madness became more complete, took on a more manageable state. Those who were particularly violent in their insanity were swiftly banished or eliminated, leaving only those who were more focused in this altered state of mind. Those individuals began to find one another and congregate into smaller tribes of Drow. At first these tribes would butt heads and be at odds, never quite descending into outright war, but always tense and unwilling to cooperate. Because we kind of talked about, and I want to keep it this way, we talked about a long time ago when kind of mapping out what the atmosphere of this would be for our players when they get to the Siski Forest as part of their campaign. We talked about incorporating concepts of different, like, elven houses and stuff like that, and we kind of and so I kind of want to refine and clarify some of those traits, and I do want to keep that idea of there being different, like, houses of elves, although I've kind of changed a little bit how I view that component of the campaign going, but we'll get there. Suffice to say, I definitely want to keep the history of there being some tribalism going on among the Drow, at least in their early days, and some unwilling to cooperate. For many years, this prevented any larger or stronger Drow society from matriculating. How do you spell it? Oh, it's M-A. There it is. Okay. From matriculating. However, over time, as with most societies, a certain subset of leaders, a certain subset of ideals brought by definitive leadership began to form. Because we have established that there's going to be, like, one sort of, like, Drow queen of sorts that kind of leads the Drow society. And so I want to make sure we're staying true to that. So, however, over time, as with most societies, a certain subset of ideals brought by definitive leadership began to form. At first, it was a singular tribe, like all the others. But one key difference led this tribe to rapid growth. Namely, I don't want to say namely, growth. This tribe did not have particular goals in mind regarding the forest and the structure of Drow society. There we go. On society. Instead, this tribe was focused on something larger. Growth of the Drow beyond the forest alone. So that was like one of the big things that, or at least I always imagined, that's one of the big things that sort of served as a coming together point of the Drow, was we finally found a leader that was all like, y'all fighting over this forest and how we live in this forest aren't thinking big enough. You know, there's a whole world outside of that forest, and I don't see why we shouldn't be aiming to have a presence in this entire world. Is sort of the idea. That's sort of the mindset that grew and sort of took hold to sort of change the Drow society and make it a much larger and more tangible, well, not tangible, much larger and more notable is kind of the word I'm looking for. Much more notable presence. Although that said, like, notable is kind of just like it's kind of just a concept, considering that they were in this isolated forest with no one around, so no one was there to take note of these guys. But hey, you know, we're getting there. Language is difficult when you're trying to be like clear and concise. It can be difficult to figure out how to use language. It's one of the things I've definitely learned over the years, just through all of this writing, especially when I started writing campaigns for other people, right? Where I'm like writing a campaign and I'm trying to describe things in ways to present to players so that they'll understand. It's hard. It can be really hard. Like, there's a lot that goes into structuring even just a single sentence, let alone an entire countless number of sentences to make a book or something. It's funny. Anyway, said this tribe was focused on something larger, growth of the Drow beyond the forest alone. Natural barbarians in this world. I mean, that's a very simplistic way to look at it, but I suppose they're much more refined than barbarians. And also I feel like innate rage ability. I don't know that I would say we've established that. But I think the concept of conquest is a very universal thing within most of the races in D&D. And I think that's because conquest is a very human thing, and humans write all of the races within D&D. No, I don't envision them actually as being very barbarian in their nature. I think it's possible to be angry and yet driven and conquesting without being violent about it. And that's kind of how I view the Drow, is they do sort of have this determination to spread and grow and obtain power, but in a very royalty focused way, not in a Hulk smash kind of way. So but yeah, so instead this tribe was focused on something larger, growth of the Drow beyond the forest alone. This particular tribe envisioned a world in which they were prominent, if not downright dominant, among the enlightened people of Zaoria. The goal to spread and reclaim much of the lost societies abandoned by others in the early days of the unhinging. So their idea, it was like, hey, you know, because like I say, they don't lose awareness of what happened to them. It's just like there's this magical radiation that just fundamentally changes how their minds work and make them much more conniving and interested in conquest and domination, right? So it's like they understand what happened with the unhinging and all that stuff, and and so what they do is, or what they'd like to do is say, hey, you know, if everyone in every society abandoned what was there in their society, that means there is just all of this unaccounted for infrastructure for society and for growth that exists. And so like the idea is, let's go reclaim all of these societies, learn what we can from all of these societies that have abandoned where they once were, you know, dominant and taking hold. Like, let's claim that stuff for our own and grow our people and be and slowly gain prominence in the world. It's like, you know, they're just sitting there. Essentially they're the it's free real estate people. They're just like, hey, like look at all this free stuff, you know. And so that's kind of what their idea is. Do that, so then as the rest of the world starts coming out of hiding, as the unhinging is winding down and the world is coming back to normal, their idea is like they won't have anywhere to go because we'll already be there, and they will have no choice but to, you know, respect us and acquiesce to our desires because we will be so dominant. We will be so predominant within this world. They won't have a choice but to deal with us. And so that's the kind of idea of this tribe and how they would pull people together. So this particular tribe envisioned a world in which they were prominent, if not downright dominant, among the enlightened people of the Zoriordi. The goal to spread and reclaim much of the lost. The goal, actually, if I'm gonna phrase it that way, I need to put in colon there. The goal to spread and reclaim much of the lost societies abandoned by others. The early days of the unhinging. The way this tribe saw it, there was, there were countless remains of cities with functional infrastructure, all across the world. With the only hindrance being the dangers of the wilds. But as they were already successfully surviving among the wilds, they had nothing to fear and every reason to suspect that they were already equipped to handle these dangers. With this goal in mind, the leaders of this tribe approached the others, presenting the idea and promising each leader their own dominion. Hey, Labo, thank you for the donation. I appreciate you, man. That means a lot to me. That means a whole lot to me. That's a cool thing for you to do, and it, like I say, it means a lot to me. I promise you, I will make sure that it goes into continuing to grow the stream, and yeah, hopefully we'll keep giving you guys good, if not better, content with all of that assistance. So thank you again. I mean it a lot. It feels rushed and flippant to say it, but to be perfectly honest, I don't know that I ever expected to get donations, so it's always a surprise to me when it happens. So thank you. I appreciate you. So with this goal in mind, the leaders of this tribe approached the others, presenting the idea and promising each leader their own dominion somewhere in the world where they could not settle, where they could live lives exactly as their tribe desired, at the scale of entire kingdoms. These promises spoke to the leaders, and soon a much larger and more cooperative collective of Drow formed, and plans for expansion began to form. The first goal was to move into the abandoned tunnel cities left by the dwarves. The Drow intended to claim these tunnels as a way to rapidly traverse the mountains and expand westward. Expand westward, and let's see here. First the mountains and expand. There we go. Expand westward. Mountains and expand westward as easily as they could to the east. But it was here that they met their first surprise, and that would be the Duergar. They had not expected other races to have grown to prominence as rapidly as them. This posed two problems. This is stuff I've already thought about, which is why I'm just kind of rapid fire going through it here. But let's see here. So this posed two problems. The first being an immediate roadblock to the grand scheme, and the second being doubt among the tribal leaders over how viable this plan was. This brings us to current times where there is tension again among tribes, though largely efforts to plan and execute the intended expansion are still in place. Boom. Okay, so there's our post-unhinging history, which there's quite a bit there, but like I say, there's a lot of stuff that happens rapidly when we're talking about 2,000. When we're talking about like just only 2,000 years of time for an entire society and an entire race within D&D, right? That a lot of stuff happens fast, and that's kind of always how I imagined it with the Drow. Like I always kind of envisioned them as being very driven. Like they view themselves as being extremely superior as part of their sort of collective madness that has come from what's happened to them over time. And they're very driven, and they want to act on this sort of perceived superiority that they have. So yeah, that's what we got there for the history. And I think I think that's good. I think I'm content with that, and I'm gonna go ahead and check that off our to-do list there, and call that a success for the day. Should make the dono button more visible. There's a lot of things I should do with my stream, and when I have time, I work on sort of editing and making it prettier. I will definitely add that to the list of things to do. I appreciate the suggestion. This has all been a process of me just sort of learning it all from scratch. I've never had any sort of training and everything. But no, I appreciate it, and I mean the thing that I appreciate the most. I think the thing that I appreciate the most is the sort of overall implication that my stream is one that deserves to have donations be a prominent part of what happens here. That genuinely means a lot to me, because I don't know that I've ever viewed myself and my streams as being something of that high quality. But I appreciate it. I appreciate it, and I will definitely take the advice into advisement. Yeah. No, that means a lot to me. I appreciate you. Okay, so with that stuff all checked off and that stuff done, I am going to just very quickly. We're halfway through the stream and halfway through our to-do list, so we are just right on schedule. I'm just gonna like run and take myself like 30 seconds. I have to run to the bathroom, and I have to refill my beverage here to make sure that my throat doesn't get dry and my voice doesn't get too hoarse while I'm talking to you guys. So I'm going to I'm going to just take a few seconds. You guys sit tight. I promise I will be back very shortly. I appreciate the patience. But my bladder is only so big, and if I'm going to try and stay hydrated, the systems just keep on marching forward. So thanks for being here. And like I say, I will be back in just a few seconds. I'm not even going to change the scene for you. You guys just sit here and like make fun of me in the chat box, and everything will be great. So all right, I'll be right back. All right, thank you so much for your patience. I appreciate it, as does my bladder. You know, sometimes Mother Nature comes knocking, and you can either answer the door or just wait for her to bust it down. But either way, that door's opening. So I appreciate you guys being patient with me. Yeah, back to it. Okay, so we finished our history here, which I think is excellent. That's really good progress for only an hour of streaming here. Granted, it's a little easier with the Drow because we only have like half of the history to have to write out. So that brings us to our next section here, which is all of this stuff right here. Talking about just generalized traits. So we talked about the history, and now we want to work a little bit on the sort of nature of how this race will appear. And all of this stuff here is focused, like, this isn't, you know, and I say this really looking at sort of like the class affinities section of it. This isn't about creating rules about how players could make a player character using this race, because I will use, I kind of use this like race card, the race card, that's, I should pick a different phrasing than that. These sheets that discuss the different races within D&D. I have them for all of the conventional player character races, as well as all of the like fringe ones, and I consider the Drow to kind of be a fringe one, as opposed to just being a subset of the elves. But when I'm doing it for the lore, and when I'm doing it within my notes, it's not about penning in or pre-deciding what players can and can't do with these races. This is about giving myself a set of sort of consistent generalities, not necessarily rules. Any of these generalities that we're about to work on can be broken at any given time, based on what we need at the time. But the general idea is to keep myself consistent, so that way across campaigns and across the world, wherever I have these guys pop up, we can, when I'm creating a character, I can kind of keep in mind what sorts of characters I should be creating within this race. And that just all comes back to what I'm always talking about, how there's a lot of value in keeping that consistency so that players can kind of have a clear sense of immersion and sort of like blur the lines between character and meta knowledge about what races will be like. Because like if there are consistent trends, that gives our character or our players the chance to learn and understand what to expect when they see someone of this, that, or the other race wandering around in the world, right? And so if we give them that sort of consistency, then it becomes much easier for them to immerse themselves in their character, because they don't have to ask the DM, what would my character know about this, right? Because we've established that consistency that becomes familiar to them as players, that they can then use that meta knowledge for their character's knowledge and interactions. So that's really what we're working on when we go with all of these class affinities. Like I say, it's the last thing that I want to do is pen in my players in terms of what types of characters they create. So this is not meant to be that, and more so meant to just be, when I'm presenting, oh, you've encountered a Drow along your travels, what are they likely to be? What kind of characteristics are they likely to present? Is sort of the idea here. So what I'm going to do here is, just to make sure I don't forget anything, I'm going to just pull up on Beyond. I'm just going to pull up the just a list of the classes here. Not intending to, oh gosh, it's like even worse than just having the freaking list right here. Not intending to pull up any details, but just to make sure I properly consider all of them here. And in fact, I'm just going to bring this over onto my other screen, and we'll just kind of go down the list here of all of them, and just sort of consider whether or not there would be an affinity for that race. Let's see. I don't want that to be like that. And then I think if we, I don't know how to structure. I need more screens. I need more screens. 2 is clearly just insufficient. I need far more screens. Here's what we're gonna do. We're just gonna give myself a little list here, and we're just gonna list them all out here to make sure I remember them all. So we got Artificer, Barbarian. Actually, here's what we can do. So as far as Artificer goes, not as likely. They're less inclined to be inventing things and all that kind of stuff. I don't consider an Artificer to be a very common thing. Barbarian, again, unlikely. The Drow view themselves as being much more refined and proper than that. I would say Bard is definitely going to be a possibility with them. Cleric, maybe a little bit. We're going to put Cleric ? And we'll consider that one. Druid, yes, absolutely. Very, very druidic. I would consider them. Fighter, maybe. We're gonna put Fighter as a ? Monk as a ? Those are both possibilities, but not likely, because we're trying to narrow it down to just like 3 or 4 really likely ones. Is kind of what I'm attempting to do here. Paladin, definitely not so much. Ranger, absolutely. Rogue, absolutely. Sorcerer, yeah. I guess I would say probably more than anything. I guess we'll say sorcerer / warlock / wizard, which are all kind of the same thing, just by different means. I would say we'll pick like 1 or 2 that are the most common there, and then depending on whether like what sources you're using, you could also add like blood hunter there, but I'm not going to delve into that right now. So yeah, Yeah, I know, everyone needs more screens. Like, in a perfect world, I would have, like, one big screen in front. Like, this is what I always imagine my dream setup. I'm gonna let myself get sidetracked just for a second. My dream setup is one big, massive screen at the forefront, right? That's the primary working screen. And then my dream would be to have, like, one to the left, one to the right, and then two over top, like, two small ones over top. So I would have, like, 5 screens, all of them dedicated to one thing. That would be my dream setup. That would be my dream setup. Which is excessive, but boy, oh boy, would it be great. Will I ever stream any of my sessions? So we've talked about it among myself and my group that I play. The hesitation that we have is if we start streaming our, because the 2 sessions I'm at I'm in 2 games. One of them I'm a player, so that one's out because I'm not the DM. And that wasn't my game. I was invited by other people into it, so that's not my game. That one's out. The other one that I'm the DM for, the thing about that one is it's me and my friends playing, and we play every week, and we have a whole lot of fun with doing it. And the thing that we all kind of recognize is if we were to start streaming our sessions, no matter how much we would say, oh, it's not going to change anything, we're just going to turn on the camera and do what we always do, no matter how much we say that, the inevitability of it is as soon as that camera is on and as soon as we're aware that we're streaming, it's going to change the nature of the game. Maybe for the better, but maybe for the worse. And the thing that we all kind of agree on is we don't want that session to change. We like that we just sit there and play, and it's just a chance every Monday night for us to sit and unwind and play and chat among friends and occasionally get sidetracked talking about different things. And we don't want to change the nature of that. And I'm actually one of the strongest proponents of not streaming those sessions exactly for that reason. That said, we have talked about ways that we could maybe have a secondary game that we do some sort of stream and or YouTube session with. We've talked about, doing a secondary game that we stream like on a Saturday once a month or something like that for an afternoon, and then like you can come in and watch the stream, and then we'll chop it up into 3 or 4 parts that get released on YouTube over the course of a month or something like that. We've thought about doing something like that. But if we ever do, that's a long ways off. So so it's not an impossibility, and in fact, I would even say it's something that we have sort of started to loosely investigate. But as far as the current sessions that I have right now, probably not. It would be something else that we would have to figure out how we can fit into our world, into our lives, all of us consistently, and all of us being of equal interest and ability to partake in it. So, it's helpful to know that there's interest. It's helpful to know that you guys would be interested in seeing how our games play out and see how like all of the stuff that I write translates into an actual game. It's actually really helpful for me to understand that and to know that that's something you guys are interested in, and it's something that we'll probably among ourselves keep talking about. But yeah, as of right now, there aren't any sort of plans beyond like, yeah, we could probably figure that out. That might be kind of neat. That's kind of the extent of it right now. But hey, we'll see. A year ago didn't think I would be streaming regularly, up to 12 hours a week and getting like donations and stuff for it. I never would have imagined that was that would be part of my life. So hey, you know what? Things change, and like I say, oftentimes it can be for the better. So, I guess stay tuned, and if you keep bugging me about it, eventually one day we'll probably make it happen. But to get back to our class affinities here, the big ones, the obvious ones are going to be our druids, rangers, and rogues. For our drow, and then the secondary ones, I would say something like a bard would actually be likely. A magic user that does it through artistic. I always imagine the drow, though it becomes much more sublime and macabre in nature, they would definitely retain their sort of artsy-fartsy elven attitude about things. So I imagine something like a bard would actually be a pretty common way for them to utilize magic. And I did see what True Blue, what you mentioned about the concept of them being wizards, just because of being a much more proper thing. I would see like wizard and sorcerer as being two things. Like sorcerer just because of like the study aspect of it, but even beyond that, like wizard, I can definitely see that being a more common thing. But yeah, I think our rogue, ranger, and druid are going to be the most common ones, with bard being the most common magic user, with a few wizards and sorcerers mixed in. And as far as people that are much more focused on fighting, I imagine them being much more monk-oriented than fighter, just because monks are much more about the finesse of things, which, again, just sort of fits that prim and proper attitude that I always imagined the Drow in my world having. So we'll just go ahead and do this. And so this is a shorter section. Let's see here. The most common, oh, because there's an extra M in there. I'm getting confused. There's too many lumps. I can't count them all. The most common classes that players will encounter among Drow NPCs will likely be druids, rangers, and rogues. Something about my day job. My day job, I'm an environmental health professional focused on air quality. I spend time going to facilities, making sure that their air emissions meet federal standards. Is what I do. I go and, like, if they're polluting too much, I tell them to stop it, and if they're not polluting too much, I say good job and give them a gold sticker. In the simplest terms. There's a lot more that goes into it than that, but that's the Cliff's Notes version of it, and it's actually the reason why video game streaming will happen a little later these days, or not these days, just today, because I have a meeting regarding one of my facilities, right smack in the middle of what my usual video game streaming time would be. Companies. So okay, here's the thing. I'll let myself get digressed just a little bit, because I do like my job and I like talking about it. There are two general attitudes that facilities take. They either have the proper attitude, which is that I am a resource for them to see what they need to do to avoid things like fines and everything. And they use me as a resource and are very cooperative with me and will ask me for advice on things, and in that situation I will help them out. And make sure that they are doing what they need to do. And the people that have a good attitude about it recognize that my job isn't to shut them down, my job is to keep them operational. Because all of these are facilities that make things that we need for our society to be modern day society. So the ones that have a good attitude about it are very cooperative with me, have no issues. But then there are also facilities that are comprised of people who are very compulsively and needlessly defiant. They will constantly try to fight me because, blah, 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 bottom line, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, dude, these are rules written by the people appointed by the people that you and your peers ultimately voted for. Like, I'm just the messenger here. And you can't bull in a china shop your way out of the things that I'm telling you, because all I am doing is relaying to you what the federal requirements are. So there are definitely facilities that are problem children that will be, like I say, just compulsively defiant about things. Because some people are just like that. Some people are like that about regulation. They just, don't tread on me, blah, 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 about stuff. And it's a closed-minded point of view, because, like I say, the thing that they don't realize is that if they are cooperative with me, I'm an incredible resource, and I will help them find the easiest ways to stay compliant while staying profitable. Because the fact is, I want them to be profitable in my area, because them being profitable in my area means they operate business in my area. And that's good for the economy in my area. And whether or not you are a fan of capitalism, the fact is, in a capitalist society, you want the economy to be good in your area. So even if you wish that it wasn't reliant on that, your community is reliant on that. and so it's a good thing for that to be good, and that's what I want. So there's it turns into a much bigger issue when they're defiant, and that's the thing that I always find the funniest about it, is it's like they are essentially making their own headaches, and all I'm there to do is tell them what they should do to avoid those headaches. So, but that's the gist of what I do. That's the gist of what I do. And in general, I would say the majority of my facilities are, at the very least, cooperative in that when I go and I say something, they'll be like, oh, okay, we'll fix it. And then they don't talk to me until the next time I go visit them. And honestly, I'm fine with that. I'm fine with that. They follow the rules and they don't increase my workload. Not much to complain about. Not a whole lot to complain about in those situations. So it's less common that we have defiant ones. It's just, I will say, it always feels disproportionate because the ones that are defiant are also the maximum. They're the ones that are the primary source of my work, because they're the ones who get violations. They're the ones who are constantly trying to get exceptions to things and all these different things. And it's like, it's a headache and it creates more work for all of us, and I wish they would just stop. But hey, you know, if it weren't for them, I probably wouldn't have a job either. So, you know, we do what we do and we move on. Alright, so let's see here. So the most common classes that players will encounter among Drow NPCs will likely be Druids, Rangers, and Rogues. Though the Drow are much less whimsical, whimsical than their elven predecessors, they retain their strong bonds with nature and the world around them. Their affinities these days are much more directed towards the darker and creepier parts of nature, but are drawn to nature none the less. So like that's kind of what my vision for these guys are or is. They still largely have like their elven affinities. There's just a different attitude, a different perspective about it, right? Well, they still love nature, but it's like they love predators. They have like predators and like spiders and bats and creepy things and those types of things they're much more in tune with, as opposed to being the granola munching type of elves that are like super into like deer and morning dew and stuff like that. To use broad strokes about it all. So that's kind of how I imagine them. Less common but still present are those Drow with pulls towards with the Drow. The Drow are those with pulls towards magic. Bards are most commonly found among Drow magic users, as the Drow also retain the elven love for arts. If their arts, even if their tastes now trend towards the sublime. I'm using that line. Towards the sublime and macabre. Macabre, there it is. Now trend towards the sublime and macabre. So retain. That said, sorcerers. Let's see here. Sorcerers and wizards are also well represented as the more, we'll say, I liked the use of the word proper here. It's more proper sources of magic in their eyes. When it comes to the to the foot soldiers of Drow society. Monks are the most likely form of melee combat specialists, as the Drow view hand to hand. Well, actually, I want to say view weaponless martial arts to be the most. I'm trying to think about how to describe this. I always imagine them liking using bare hands, because to them that like brings them the closest to their foe and kind of makes it the most artful. Like, you know, this like weird, dark, twisted mindset of artistry behind killing, and that being like the use of your bare hands makes you most connected to your enemy, which is like the most connected to the art form. Like this weird convoluted reason why, like really to just justify the fact that they love being violent with their bare hands is sort of my idea behind it. To be the most intimate form of combat and killing. And we'll just leave it as that. Enough said. Enough said. Honestly, I think that's probably all we really need for class affinities. We don't need to go into too much detail. Just sort of like a baseline there. Let's see here. Okay, you've got an idea for fun. Did you say homebrew systems you have to make in order for it to work? I mean, like, yeah, you could. If you wanted to really go homebrew, you could definitely make big lists of like homebrew stuff for 5e, but you could also look into more open form rule sets. Like there's like the fate system and stuff like that that are intended to be incredibly customizable. So if like what you're saying is just that 5e doesn't lend itself well to the setting that you want to do, look for other rule sets. There are so many out there that there's probably one that fits better if that's what the issue is. I would say look into other rule sets if you're worried about how much homebrew you would need to do. Okay, let's see here. So personality traits. This is kind of a fun one. Just talking about them. I mean, I feel like this is all I feel like this is a pretty straightforward one, because I don't intend to change their mindsets. Like I don't have to change their mindsets a lot to have them fit into their role in my homebrew world here. So I think this part is pretty straightforward, and we can just kind of largely repeat a lot of rules as written stuff. Yeah, so just revamp the weapons, and if that's the only thing that's different, then just like do it. I don't know. I don't know what else to tell you. Like that's the beauty of tabletop RPGs. You can have the freedom to do whatever you want. Just start working on it, play test it a little bit, do like a one shot with your group to see if it works, and you know, just play around with it, have fun with it. That's the awesome part about tabletop RPGs, is you can do whatever you want with them. There really aren't rules behind it. Like the only time there are rules is if you're like part of the adventuring league. And if that's not your jam, then, you know, you do your own homebrew stuff. So I would say just try it. You know, there's nothing else to it. Nothing else to it. The only limitation is yourself. Okay, personality traits for the Drow. The Drow are not. So I kind of, one thing I want to like make super clear is kind of what we talked about. The Drow are not inherently any more violent than their elven ancestors, despite what many on the outside might be inclined to think of them. The Drow don't. Well, I will say. While they believe in their own superiority, superiority, while they believe in their own superiority and desires to desires to control as much of the world as possible. They do not necessarily believe that these goals require the extinction of anyone else. Like I'm trying to describe here, so like the Drow, there's the tendency to assume that all evil wants isolation and exclusivity, right? There's this sort of like there tends to be an assumption when discussing concepts of like good and evil that evil necessitates exclusion, and the Drow aren't really about that. Like they believe in their own superiority. Sorry to hear that, Blabo. Get better soon. Definitely take care of yourself, and thank you for stopping by. Nonetheless, I appreciate you, man. I appreciate you, and feel better. But yeah, there's a lot of these ideas that if something is evil, it necessarily wants to destroy all that's good, and I don't think the Drow that's not really what they embody. They believe in their own superiority, but it's more so that they are indifferent about anyone else. Other people can do whatever they want so long as they don't interfere with the Drow sort of enacting their global domination goals here. So I'm trying to kind of convey that in what I write here. While they believe in their own superiority and desires to control as much of the world as possible, they do not necessarily believe that these goals require the extinction of anyone else. In function, the Drow are mostly indifferent towards the actions and existence of other people, so long as the others don't interfere with their plans of world domination. As long as the others don't interfere with the plans of world domination, they are welcome to live their own pitiful lives, as far as the Drow are concerned. On an individual basis, Drow are snobbish. Drow are snobbish and generally disinterested in other races. If you were to meet a Drow on the streets, they would likely look at you as one might look at horse dung on the bottom of their shoe. Gross and in need of removing, but not worthy of malice or anger. That's kind of how they would look at them. That's sort of the idea that I have of them. Although the one thing I will say here, and this is what's going to serve us really well for our characters once we bring these guys, once we throw our characters into the Drow society, then things are a little different, and I want to kind of describe that here. And so we're going to just say, that said, if outsiders find their way in among the Drow villages and cities, if outsiders find the way, they will find themselves in considerable danger. The Drow are largely very religious and ritualistic, while conventionally He will use creatures found in the woods for sacrifices. Says the Drow are unlikely to pass up the chance for a higher stakes sacrifice of a humanoid should such an individual fall into their laps. Drow cities are not safe places for travelers, and anyone finding their way finding themselves in one should seek to leave immediately. So see everyone, that sweaty guy on the bus who keeps flirting with people. That's very specific, very specific. I suppose there are some that would have that thought go into them. Mostly, I think it's just more so that they just view everyone as being beneath them. They view themselves as kings and queens among peasants. Is sort of how the Drow view themselves. That's kind of how I see them. And so, like, you know, and so this last paragraph talking about them, you know, like, if you find yourself in a Drow city, you're in danger. Again, it's not out of malice. It's more so that, and this plays into what we did last week on our lore stream, where we were talking about Lolth and how the Drow worship her and her spidery goddessness. They worship her, and they often offer up sacrifices to earn her favor, and they definitely will believe that the sacrifice of, like, a humanoid soul is going to be much more valuable, especially to an entity such as Lolth, than just that of some monster they find wandering among the forest. You know, it's and so if a player character, right, essentially finds their way into the city, which guess what's going to happen in our campaign, then they're going to find themselves in a situation where they will likely be used for a sacrifice, because the Drow are just not going to pass up that opportunity. Yeah, well, I mean, it's not surprising that Magic the Gathering has crossovers. It's the same company, and my understanding is that largely it's meant to all be sort of the same universe, or at the very least they're like cooperative universes that can coexist. So that doesn't surprise me at all. It is a fun coincidence, though. Let's see here. They only made one official site. I don't play Magic the Gathering. I've never gotten into deck builders. Deck builders are just not my thing. I have had so many friends try so hard to get me into deck builders, because there's this assumption that because I'm into D&D, I must be, like, really into card games and deck builders, and I think it's all, what it all comes down to is I've never had the money. I have never had the money. Just the universe that can exist at the same time. Fair enough. Yeah, no, I have never gotten into deck builders. I love that people are as into Magic the Gathering as they are. I think it's an awesome hobby that, like, is a really, like, largely a good one for people to be in. It's a fun, innocent enough competition and everything. I have zero interest in it. I have tried so hard. I have genuinely tried to get into Magic the Gathering for the sake of my friends that are into it, because I have so many friends. They'll play online, they'll play in person, they have like 15 decks, they keep up with what decks are legal and what decks aren't. And for me, I'm just like, man, I don't have the brain space. I have so many other hobbies that I'm a part of that I just do not have the brain space, nor do I have the money for it. So yeah, no, Magic is not my thing. If you want conversations on Magic, you're in the wrong stream, my friend. You're in the wrong stream. I apologize. So okay, so that gives us our personality traits there. For these guys, I don't think we need to add a whole lot else. That kind of gives us the idea. I mean, really, all of it can just be On an individual basis, Drow are snobbish and generally disinterested in other races. That right there is kind of the one. That's kind of the sentence that covers it all. I think beyond that, we just don't need a whole lot. I think that kind of covers it and really explains them. So yeah, I think we've got that one checked off the list, which then just leaves us with interracial relations, which is, again, I think a really easy one. We can kind of just keep that same sentence and do it there. That's fair. That's fair. Looking at the art is fair. I mean, I do that. I do that with that's one of the reasons why I like purchasing the actual D&D books rather than just getting the online, even though I almost exclusively use online resources than the actual physical books these days, because the books for me are just kind of fun to look at the art. I like looking at the art that they have in there, particularly the monsters. They got some creepy monsters in there, and I love it. So, okay, interracial relations. This is a really easy one. I'm genuinely just gonna copy this and paste it, honestly. Drow are snobbish and generally disinterested in other races. We'll expound upon that a little bit, but I mean, I think when we're just trying to get the gist of it, when we're trying to get our inside flap paragraph, I think that's one of the most important things we can offer here. Drow are snobbish and generally disinterested in other races. They have plans for the growth of their own people, and these plans are primarily independent of any other races in the world. There's not an inherent animosity about it, as the Drow aren't actively angry about the existence of other people. They simply don't care about these other people. So that's pretty much it. Like, they just don't care. They just don't care about other people, and that's like honestly, that's kind of the easiest thing to do. The one exception to that, though, there is one exception to that. The only exception to this indifference is towards the Duergar. Though personally, the Drow don't really have anything against the Duergar. There is an inherent anger among the Drow that these Duergar are in the way of their conquest goals so early in their efforts to pursue conquest. So it's one of those, like, it's nothing personal, but you guys are in our way, so we hate you. As a result, there are usually ongoing efforts by the Drow to send out scouting parties into the mountain tunnels to just generally disrupt Duergar activities. This it's kind of like a low-key war. I'm gonna say that this low-key war is an ongoing thing that the Drow are the instigators of, as the Duergar are much more interested in fortifying their own cities within the mountains than going about a combative war with the Drow. But the Drow can't let it go, as they still view the mountains, mountains as a key element to their plans of expansion. Boom. There we go. There we go. And I think that's all we need. Honestly, I think that's all we need. That's kind of the only thing. It's kind of the only thing. Yeah, I think that does it. I think that does it. So I'm gonna check it off the list. I'm gonna check it off the list, and there we go. With like 9 minutes to spare, we've gotten our to-do list done, which makes today a very productive day. We have effectively created the entire history of an entire race within just a few pages worth of writing. No, this is all of this stuff, all of these notes that I put in here are kind of meant to be Cliff Notes ideas. And the idea is to establish a thing, just to sort of recap what we've worked on and why we're doing this. The point for me behind adding all of these bits of lore, with whether it's races or Pantheon, is not to create the definitive, covers everything, every detail, every event history of this race or these people or whatever it is. Right? The idea is to provide myself a baseline format to fall back on whenever these, whenever these people show up later in anything that I write within this world. And it's to establish a consistency that will remain, so that way I don't accidentally throw in a bunch of contradicting things for players as they're trying to learn and understand my homebrew world. It can be very easy when you're doing everything purely homebrew. It can be really easy to accidentally sort of cross your own feet and step on your own toes with the stuff that you do if you don't have some sort of framework for consistency. So for me, this type of stuff is really important. It's really foundational, really necessary when it comes to creating an entirely homebrew world. But that said, I don't like necessarily creating a step-by-step, date-by-date timeline for these types of things, because I do want to leave plenty of room for creation of other things in the future. So that's how we've sort of come up with the structure for most of this, or how I've come up with the structure of most of this this card that I put here, right? We have origins, pre-unhinging history, post-unhinging history, right? These are just general blurbs to just say, what has the trajectory and existence of this race been in history? And then this one is, generally speaking, what are they like, right? You'll notice that I don't really have anything here where I'm trying to add, 3 defining moments in history or anything like that. I never do anything like that in these general information cards that I do, because I want to, again, establish consistency and generalized traits and a generalized history that we can fall back on to make sure that anything else we write within our world doesn't end up confusing players based on history that does or doesn't exist, right? While leaving plenty of room for us to create the details as necessary, right? By leaving these things open as much as it is, if we decide we're going to throw in another Drow society elsewhere in the world and we want to add in some other important bits of history, there is so much space in between everything that we've put here that it's really not going to be hard to establish another society, another existence for them. So that's something to keep in mind. If you're going to try and follow along with sort of this example that I've done right here today, it's an important thing to keep in mind that you want to add generalized history without tying yourself down and leaving no room for future expansion of whatever you're doing in your homebrew world. And it's not really a complicated thing to do, but it's something that a lot of people probably don't think about early on in world writing. I know I didn't. I would try to get too detailed or not detailed enough with history, and I would result in crossing myself. Both of those things end up with you sort of accidentally crossing over yourself and canceling out your own things that you've made. and that can be both problematic for your own satisfaction as a world builder and a DM, as well as problematic for your players as they're trying to understand the world that you're presenting to them. So with all of that in mind, we did it. We did what we set out to do today. Hopefully it was interesting and helpful to people. And I think the timing works out just right because we got about 5 minutes until I would normally end the stream. So we can go ahead and let things wind down here. Just as a note, usually I will switch over and stream to video games right after writing. Video game streaming is going to happen later today. Usually we start like right around now, which is 1:30 p.m. Eastern time. That's where it is right now, so you can just kind of keep that in mind as we're adjusting. I am going to be here playing video games a little later, but it's going to start at around 3 o'clock this afternoon, maybe a bit sooner. As I stated, I have a meeting for my day job that I have to participate in, and that happens right smack in the middle of when I would normally be video game streaming. So if you are interested in watching me play, today's Tuesday, so I'll be playing Halo. If you're interested in watching me do that, stop by in about an hour and a half or so, and I should be on and gaming. As long as the meeting doesn't take forever, no promises. I will put announcements up about when I'm going to start streaming this afternoon. When I'm going to start streaming again, I will put announcements up on my Discord as well as on my Twitter. So if you are interested in getting announcements, you can check both of those out. Links to those can be found on the About section of my Twitch page. So feel free to check those out. Other things you can find on that About page, we already kind of talked about it, but I do have a donation link. And you can find it there. It's it may not be prominent enough, but it is there, so you can check that out. Yeah, anything you guys contribute is obviously immensely appreciated, and I will use to sort of enhance and advance my streams just to keep giving you guys more better content, because that's what I love doing. So there's that there. A few other links that are there. There's the YouTube page that you can feel free to check out if you want to see other things that I've written, if you want to see other games that I played, or if you want to keep up but it's just hard for you to watch when I actually stream. I put all my VODs on my YouTube channel. You can go check that out, and you can find anything that's just there for people to enjoy at your leisure. So you can check that one out. And then if you are interested in some of the other things that I talk about going on in my life, the fact that I'm a kickboxing coach, the fact that I do a lot of rock climbing, my day job, the fact that I have a one-eyed cat, all that kind of stuff that comes up but isn't on stream, I now have an Instagram that I am learning how to use. So if you are interested in all of those other smaller slice of life things, you can check that out, and you can get little tastes of the other cool things that I do in my life. So with all of that stuff in mind, with all of those links talked about, again, you can find all of those on the About page. This is a good time to call it a stream. Like I say, video game streaming will happen a little bit later. Usually my streams are Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. 11:30 a.m. Eastern time is when we do our writing, which we're just finishing up. And then usually immediately after at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time is when video games are streamed. And this week, I believe I will be back this Thursday and Friday for writing at the usual times and gaming at the usual times. I will update on those various announcement pages I talked about if that changes, but as of right now, that is the plan. That is the plan. So today's the only weird day, and then of course tomorrow is Wednesday, so there will be no streams tomorrow. There. I think that's all of the announcements. It's so much to get through. That's the thing that has surprised me the most about adding the different social media links and stuff, is just how long it takes to explain all the ones that are there. So that's all that's there. I think that's all of my announcements. If you're kind enough to sit here through my announcements, I actually really appreciate that. I know this is the part when most people back out, so the fact that you're interested enough to at least let me get through my spiel, I really appreciate that. But in general, I really appreciate you guys. I really like streaming. I really like doing this. I consider myself extremely lucky that I get to do this. And I consider myself extremely lucky that there are people who take the time to show up, discuss, watch what I'm doing, offer feedback, all of that stuff. It's really cool when people show interest in the creative things that other people do, and I just find that endlessly flattering that people show up and show interest in the creative things that I'm doing. And I just can't thank everyone enough for that. It means a lot to me. I feel like I am very fortunate that I have a great audience, and yeah, I don't know. I can't gush about that enough. I appreciate you guys so much. You guys are rad people. And with that, I will let you go. I have a meeting to go prepare for. And I will be back later. So check back at around 3 o'clock p.m. or in an hour and a half from wherever your time zone is. If you're interested in watching me continue to play a little bit more Halo, check me out then, or you can wait for the announcements. Or if you're just here for the writing, that's totally fine. I'll be back Thursday, and I'll see you guys then. Whenever the next time I see you guys. I appreciate each and every one of you. Y'all are cool, rad people. Keep being cool and rad, and yeah, I will see you later today, most likely, is when I will be back. So keep it real. Catch you guys later. Yeah, you guys are awesome. Okay, bye.